What is egregious, though, is the misinformation and disinformation bill that the federal government is currently trying to push. Now, we know what this means. It means ACMA, the Communications and Media Authority, would be given the power to call in people to explain what has been posted on social media. Essentially, they set up a ministry of truth that says, well, this is misinformation or this is disinformation. It should be banned from social media. You shouldn't be able to post it. Social media companies should be sanctioned for what they allow you to put online. And who decides what is misinformation or disinformation? A government arm. So the government is essentially deciding what is true. You can see where it all ends up. Well, the coalition is now saying that if someone who is affiliated with a social media company, and what exactly affiliation is, we don't quite know. Is it someone who is a staff member at, say, a Facebook or an X, or is it someone who is paid by a social media platform? For instance, on YouTube, a lot of people derive advertising revenue from what they post, the videos they post, so they are technically affiliated with that business. They would be able to be jailed for a year if they refuse to cooperate with a public inquiry called by the communications minister. Now, look, if you post something on social media or you work at a social media company and then the government comes up with some sort of trumped up public inquiry into what is being posted, you can understand why you'd say, well, no, that's just free speech. We don't want to cooperate here. But if you don't show up, a year in jail potentially, according to the coalition. Media lawyer Justin Quill has called this out and exactly how chilling it is for free speech.
Is absolutely an undermining of free speech on so many different levels. And it's so concerning, so big brotherish, that we have this definition of misinformation, for example, reasonably verifiable as false, misleading or deceptive. Reasonably verifiable according to who? The government? And that's ultimately the main issue that I see here, is that the government or a government agency determine what is reasonably verifiable as false, misleading or deceptive. Some things might seem deceptive to the government but are actually in reality true. So it's greatly concerning to me.
Spot on. And National Senator Bridget McKenzie said at CPAC on the weekend that if the coalition wins the next election, they would repeal this piece of legislation should it be passed.
We're voting down this very appalling bad bill, and we're proud to do so. We hope it doesn't get up with the support of the Greens, but it will be something we'll be getting rid of in a coalition government under.
You'll repeal it?
Well, I would be, yes, absolutely. Good. We have to do everything we can, but that's why you need to vote coalition in the Senate too.
This apparently comes under Section 202 of this bill, which the government says would not apply to individuals who post on social media. So if you're just Joe Blogs who post something that is supposedly misinformation or disinformation, you couldn't be jailed for not showing up to an inquiry. But presumably someone else who is connected to the social media outfit itself could be jailed for a year for not showing up to speak on your behalf. The whole thing just seems ridiculous.
So why would you, if you were a social media organisation, not just say, you know what, let's just suppress Caleb's tweet, let's just suspend Caleb for a couple of months just to keep the government happy, rather than have an investigation, a hearing. We've got to have people now show up. If we don't cooperate, we risk jail. Easier just not to allow your tweet to go viral than to go through the rigmarole that the government is putting on. And that's really what they're trying to do, right?
Absolutely. They're outsourcing the censorship, saying we will make you liable for what other people say on your platform, which I just think is utter nonsense. Also, keep in mind, these platforms have hundreds of millions of users, especially if you're talking about a platform like X, Facebook. These are behemoths in the social media world. Can you imagine how many hearings, even in the space of a week or a month, ACMA then could call, you guys are in trouble for this one, you guys are in trouble for that one. They'd be tied up for years on end. I don't even know how our courts would be able to process it. These processes, as they stand, make absolutely no sense whatsoever. And something to keep in mind is if it's the social media companies that are being held liable, most of these companies aren't based in Australia. Most of them are based in America. And while America is our friend and very good ally, who among us likes the idea of Americans deciding what Australians can and can't say on our social media platforms? And then, of course, there's the case of TikTok, which is Chinese-owned, which no doubt already censors us. But you're basically now, these social media platforms would be required by our own government, by law, to do the censorship for them. And just as we discover nearly every time a government gets hit with one of these, whether it's the story we were talking about last night where they spent $360,000 relocating an office only to move it back in 2 years later, they always blame the bureaucrats. So government loves outsourcing. And in that case, it was PwC. We followed PwC's advice. We paid for all the consultancies. This is exactly what would occur on mass if they successfully made these platforms liable, because then if anyone called out the censorship, they could just be like, well, it was the platform, we wouldn't have even condoned that censorship. Arguably, they'd be able to make that argument.
I was heartened to hear Bridget McKenzie talking to Credlin earlier tonight say the Coalition would vote against this misinformation bill. I'm just wondering if they've removed from their own Liberal Party website their support for ACMA being given these exact powers.
Exactly, which that was a story we brought to you last week. The Coalition is coming out quite strongly saying we will oppose this. You heard Bridget McKenzie say there that if it got up, a Coalition government would actually go so far as to repeal it. However, if you go to a site on the Federal Liberal Party's website, they've got an entire page dedicated to fake news and what they, as a coalition, intend to do to combat it. Let's not forget this Combating Misinformation, Disinformation bill was the brainchild of the former Liberal government. So you can bet your bottom dollar in some way, shape or form they do intend to follow through. Not the bill that Labor currently has before them, God forbid it gets up, but certainly we would see something similar from a Liberal government. And I think they're being quite dishonest about that, in my humble opinion.
It's just unprecedented in the way it controls speech, right? Like, I think there is a legitimate argument for social media platforms being held accountable for, say, defamatory content that is posted on their platforms, in the same way that a newspaper or a TV channel can be held accountable for defamatory content that is posted on their platforms. You know, that you can come and sue me for what I've said, but the channel also gets dragged into that case, and I don't see why that shouldn't also apply to Facebook and Twitter and whatever else. But what they're saying here is that we will go beyond what is just untrue and provable in a court of law and give it to a quasi-government arm in the form of ACMA and let them decide what is and isn't untrue without the checks and balances of a courtroom. It's a completely different system and chilling for free speech.
Well, as Justin Quill there defined misinformation in the bill, anything reasonably verifiable as false. Well, if you post something that's
so
reasonably
broad.
verifiable as, well, that's not true, why do we need ACMA to be able to launch a hearing and investigation? Shouldn't we leave it to intelligent people to realise, that doesn't really make sense? I think Liz is having us on there. We don't need a government body to shut you down.
What you just described is free speech manifest, and our fellow peoples can decide whether we're full of it or whether we're telling the truth.